Good day to you. I am Ella McChrystal, psychotherapist, clinical hypnotherapist and trauma and resilience coach. I wanted to talk to you today about the amygdala. You may or may not have heard of the amygdala, so I'm going to break it down and explain it to you today. So the amygdala is really your fear response. It's the part of your brain that keeps you safe and tells you when there's danger ahead. When we were primal man and we were hunter-gatherers, we may have been dealing with lions and tigers and bears, and our amygdala would kick in to tell us that there was a bear or a lion chasing us or waiting for us. And then our brain would go into the process of knowing what to do, fight, flight or freeze. So our amygdala is very, very handy. And it is the emotional centre of our brain. When the amygdala is woken up by a perceived threat, the emotional centre of the brain actually takes over from the thinking part of the brain, which is the cortex. So now we have a situation where we are in the moment more than ever before, and usually because of a perceived threat rather than a real threat. As primal man, the lions and the tigers and the bear, they were our daily reality and we needed to stay alive. In the present day, actually there's very few events where we need our amygdala to kick in, but it still functions in that way. Whilst the rest of our thinking brain has evolved, our amygdala has actually stayed very, very primal. And once it's had an event that has been dangerous or fear-provoking, it will become hypersensitive to similar events in the future. So basically it's now constantly on the lookout, especially for people that have been through trauma. Their amygdala can be in a heightened hypervigilant state. And so that means if it's hypervigilant and if it's doing too much, it's taking over from the thinking part of your brain way too much. And it means you're going through the fight-flight response, which means you're having to work a lot harder just to stay alive. Because in that fight-flight response, adrenaline is released into our system. When that happens, our nervous system is alert and we are sending more blood and oxygen around our body to fight or flight. Our digestion will actually shut down because it's not needed in fight-flight. Our libido shuts down because it's not needed in fight-flight. We will sweat more to make us slippery so that if a predator catches us, we can get away. We will feel that our heart's working harder to pump the blood around our body. So we may feel palpitations. We may feel like we can't catch our breath because, of course, the lungs are working harder to pump oxygen around. And because the digestion has suddenly slowed down, we may feel nauseous, sick, butterflies, or even like we need to go to the toilet. So all of those things happen when the amygdala is hypersensitive and when there's perceived threat. But unfortunately, when it becomes hypersensitive or hypervigilant, anything and everything can become perceived threats, even a smell or a sound. So it's really important to know that if you're in that hypervigilant state and your amygdala is hypersensitive, hyper aware, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on your body. We also release stress hormones after we've released adrenaline to keep us going. So that makes our bodies very acidic. It makes our bodies very inflamed because those stress hormones can be like a corrosive agent to our bodies and our brains. We're going to be more tired. We're going to have digestive issues and we're going to have joint aches and pains, headaches even. So it's very important to understand that. Now, the difference between us and animals is that once they have the experience, say a deer grazing and an antelope chases it, it will go into that fight-flight process. But then 15 minutes later, it achieves balance again and it goes back to grazing because they don't have the thinking part. We do. So often after an event, we'll think about it. The best way to hijack that situation is when you feel yourself going into that hypervigilant mode, that anxiety state. Because it's so dangerous to your body, you need to take action. You need to force the thinking part of your brain. Write down what you're thinking or say it out loud. When we write things down, when we say them out loud, when we engage that thinking part of the brain, the amygdala is aware that we're taking control. We can also do a very simple breathing exercise to allow the brain and the nervous system to know that we're taking over. So we have something called the autonomic nervous system, and it comprises the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The amygdala brings that onto hyper alert when we go into that fight and flight. So in the case of fight and flight, the sympathetic nervous system takes over, and that's where everything works so much faster and goes into hyper mode. So because breathing is part of that automatic part of that nervous system, when we take over the breath work, when we force the breath work, when we force the thinking, we're engaging the different parts of the brain. A really simple breathing exercise is to do this. Inhale for 4 seconds. Pause for 4 seconds. And exhale for 4 seconds. Do this for 2 to 5 minutes and you will bring everything down again. You will slow everything down. You will tell your brain you are in control. You are engaging and you are taking over from the amygdala when you practice that. So writing things down as you feel you're going into that anxiety state because of your amygdala. Saying things out loud. And of course, using that breathing technique. Now, all of that brings it all down, calms the whole system down and tells the brain and body you're in control. If we don't do that, that whole response could really linger on because, as I said before with the example of the deer, we can continue to think about the thing that's just happened. And remember, for us, on the whole, we're dealing with perceived threat, not real threat. And when we're in a state of hypersensitivity, hypervigilance, and when we're hyper alert, we're on the lookout for these things when we don't need to be. So actually, I would say as a general exercise every single day, using that breathing technique, inhale for 4, pause for 4, exhale for 4 seconds, just to show your brain and body, have that purpose and intent at the beginning of each day to be in control. On that note, have a lovely day.